But one thing, I don't think I turned it on, did I?
You don't need that.
Yeah, I'm on. It's on here.
He said the battery might be good.
So, I'll continue with my story as I recharge myself here. But, just watching Kathy, I don't know if anyone's ever watched her, but it's like, as soon as the first note hits, like how I identify a song, when the first note hits, like the spirit hits her, like right then and there. And I'm pretty confident in saying that if a mosquito were to bite her, it would fly away singing "Power in the Blood."
Is it still not coming on?
Still ain't coming on.
You know, I know why.
Because we never turned that back on? Does it work now?
Yes.
All right.
So this battery.
Yeah. So we are in Revelation chapter 17 tonight. Brother Howard presented me with this study for 17. It's by a guy by the name of David Guzik, if anybody's ever heard of him. Very good, very well informed. He does a really good job. I actually use some of his stuff sometimes, but I've never actually read this chapter that he did. And Brother Howard did this ever so graciously 20 minutes before service. Goes, here! If I had this last week, I'd be able to use this a little more. But, so we are starting chapter 17 tonight. Honestly, I don't know if we'll get through it. It's 18 verses. But chapters 17 and 18 deal with Babylon. We're going to start off tonight talking about what is known as the religious Babylon. And before we get started, let's just get something out of the way. These chapters are some of the most debated chapters in Revelation over, is it talking about the literal Babylon or a figurative Babylon? And there's all these types of things that you can look at. So we're going to kind of go through, talk about the different viewpoints on it as we go, kind of like we've been doing. But, I mean, it's very good information, and just the way some things are put, I mean, if you can't, some of the things are hard to decipher what's being talked about. Others, it's like Jesus is smacking you in the face, telling you better understand this. So that's kind of the way this chapter is going to go. But we'll start tonight. If somebody would like to read, let's do the first 6 verses of chapter 17, and we'll begin tonight.
And there came one of the 7 angels which had the 7 vials, and talked with me, saying unto me, Come hither, I will shew unto thee the judgment of the great whore that sitteth upon many waters, with whom the kings of the earth have committed fornication. And the inhabitants of the earth have been made drunk with the wine of her fornication. So he carried me away in the spirit into the wilderness, and I saw a woman sit upon a scarlet-colored beast, full of names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. And the woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet color, and decked with gold and precious stones and pearls, having a golden cup in her hand full of abominations and filthiness of her fornication. And upon her head was a name written, Mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and abominations of the earth. And I saw the woman drunken with the blood of the saints, and with the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. And when I saw her, I wondered with great admiration.
All right, so we're not going to go into the full-on description of what John is saying here, mainly because we have some of the younger mixed in with this. Some of the words are used. Parents, talk about this with your kids. You know, I encourage that. I'm a big pusher. Parents need to be talking to their kids more about the Bible at home than what they are. You know, and I'm not saying that parents don't do that, but you know, you can never get enough Bible into your kid, especially with the things going on. So a lot of this I do encourage parents, talk with your kids about, especially some of the descriptions that are given here in this chapter. If questions come up, talk to them about it. That way they kind of have an understanding. But here, if you notice right off the bat in verse 1, we have almost a continuation straight out of chapter 16. So if you remember back to 16, a few weeks ago when we were in there, the 7 angels, the 7 bowls of judgment being poured out. Well, here, John has one of those 7 angels which carried out those judgments come to him and tells him to come here. Okay, that's what that come hither is. He's saying, come here and I'm going to show you the judgment of the great whore that sitteth upon many waters. And here he is talking about Babylon. And the angelic guide shows John a new strange vision, and that's the best way I could put this, is a strange vision. It's the best way we can describe what's going to happen here, of a great prostitute who is seated on many waters. Pictures in an ancient art, there's this ancient art, a guy by the name of, his last name was Keener, and he wrote a Bible background commentary on the New Testament, and he put it out in 1993. He says, ancient art shows cities as their patron goddess, often enthroned on the shore of a river. And so that's kind of what he's laying out here. But it's important to know Rome is on the water, as is almost every major ancient city. There was a reason for that. Goods coming in and out. Major ports. Think about some of your cities today in the United States of America that sit on a port. There's some larger cities. And they're used, and it's not like they're established like that by accident. Because that's where everything comes in and out. So right off the bat, I said there's some discussions, there's some disagreements on here. So right off the bat, let's go ahead and talk about it. So either Rome or Babylon could be in view here.
Right.
Now this book is going to use, this chapter is going to use Babylon.
Right.
But this could actually be talking about Rome. There is that discussion that takes place. So think about this. So either Rome or Babylon could be in view here, either standing for literal Rome or literal Babylon, or as a symbol for the last great capital city that is not yet named in the world. There's those possibilities as well. One writer that I was reading, he said one reason for Babylon being used is because of Babylon's history, of where they stood when it came to how they stood with God. Babylon did not have a good standing with God. If you remember back to the Daniel study. We learned a lot about Babylon through there. So there's a lot of symbolic in here. A lot of people believe. Up to now, I will say that I personally believe that as we read it, it's going to happen. And now, for the first time, you're going to hear me say that I actually partially believe chapter 17 to be symbolic. Only in the name of the city, symbolic. Okay? Let's get that out of the way now. I'm not saying that from here on out we're symbolic. I'm saying the term Babylon is symbolic at this point. I was like, I didn't know if that was a kid or what. I'm like, what am I going to look up to find? Pastor.
I think that's a very easy platform for you to step out on, because cities are used symbolic all over the place in this book.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There's a lot of places you could say Babylon had been there, Babylon had been here,
Right.
cities of importance.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly it. So that's kind of why I take that little step whenever I say that, because it is used often. So whenever you look at this, if you go to the symbolic view, favoring the view of Babylon is in view is Jeremiah chapter 51 verse 7 and 51 verses 13, which says, "You may live by many waters and are rich in treasures." That comes straight out of Jeremiah. Now here, the prostitute has shared her vices and corruption with the world powers. So do we understand what's happening right off the bat? We're finding out there's corruption in the world. Now, we have corruption today. There's corruption in the world today. There absolutely is. If you think back all the way back to the garden, there's been corruption in the world ever since that point. That corruption is Satan himself, has put corruption into the world. And the corruption that we have today is nothing compared to the corruption that will be taking place in the last days.
That's right.
This is nothing. You know, we always talk about, you hear people talk about, mainly those of the older generation, of how bad things are today compared to when they were growing up. Well, my generation can do the exact same thing. That's how bad it's gotten. I've been out of school a long time now, celebrating my 15th year of graduation this year. I've been out a while, okay? That's a long time. But whenever you look at the things that are taking place today versus whenever I was in school, listen, when I was in school, I didn't have to worry about which bathroom to use. I was smart enough to know which one to walk into.
Right.
Okay, so when we talk about world corruption and the way things are going, I can relate to that. You know, yes, abortion was a problem. All since Roe versus Wade, abortion's been an issue. My generation grew up in abortion. But for some reason, it's on a major platform right now, it seems like. And it is really at the forefront. And that's not the only thing. I could be up here all night telling you about the things that are corruption that we are seeing in this world today. If you want to know what they are, just turn on the news.
Yeah.
Turn on any news channel.
See it in the United Nations.
Yeah.
The corruption that you're speaking of, it's kind of like, you know, not that anybody would do this, but let's just say that some people do, and I hope, did everybody eat their dinner tonight already? Before I use my example. Okay. It's not that
I
bad.
love these kind of examples.
it's
You
not-
got to ask that question first.
Yeah.
There's one thing to open up your fridge and see a block of cheese and see some mold over on the one corner. You cut it off, and basically the rest of it's still good. This corruption, you know, we've lived through corruption in our lives here. This corruption in the Bible is the entire block of cheese is covered in mold. There still might be a few people around underneath all that somewhere, but it's all you can see.
Yeah.
It's all that's there. There's nothing left for you to turn to. It's just completely, everything's corrupt.
And the mold started on the inside too, probably.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's working its way to be nothing but a block of mold.
Right. That's exactly it. So there's the corruption with world powers. And John is carried into a desert, and the woman is with the beast. Now, do we understand who the beast is?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Who is it, Howard? He shook his head first, so I'm going to throw him on the spot.
My grandpa.
The beast is the Satan, Antichrist.
There you go, the Antichrist. I knew he'd get it.
Everybody's just like,
Everyone's sitting there going, you got it. Come on.
This works, but sometimes this is.
See, my problem is this definitely works. This just doesn't feel good.
Nobody's gonna argue.
All right, so the woman, let's get back on track. This is where I needed you, Lou. All right, let's go.
back on track.
Back on
We
track.
were
That's where I
talking about
needed you.
this morning, Dennis, when he got up, we started down there right from the, and he did it. Dennis went right down the rabbit trail, and he's like, and he's like, Lou's not here to tell us to come on, let's get going.
All right, so the woman is with the beast, and the color shows the connection to the great red dragon, who is Satan. The cup in her hand is similar to the vision of Jeremiah 51, verses 6 through 7, where the nations are drunk with Babylon's filth. The woman is also a mystery in that she is the mother of idolatrous filth and of persecutions of the righteousness. So what we have here is basically, whenever you read this, people are drunk on false religion, is one way you can put this right now. There are people that are absolutely 100% sure that the Antichrist is Jesus. Okay? There will be that. There will be, I'm not saying right now. Actually, there probably are right now.
Yes.
People with that belief. But the way he presents himself, remember how the Antichrist is going to present himself. He is going to be given power by Satan. See, a lot of people talk about the power that God has, but they forget that Satan has power himself.
That's right.
And he's going to give power to the Antichrist to perform miraculous things to the point where some people will believe that this Antichrist will absolutely be Jesus. There is there's a lot of scholars that believe that. And there's the whole reason behind it. Now, for those that are still here, remember, we still have those that believe that the church is not raptured out yet. We've covered the premillennial belief, we've hit the amillennial belief, but we haven't got to the stage yet of the postmillennial resurrection, or rapture. So, postmillennial resurrection. Oh, somebody's getting resurrected. But so we still have those people that believe that, and they think that, and this is where one of the verses they use to help them through as they talk about this stuff is, we all know that God's people will know His voice. So people that believe in the postmillennial doctrine will tell you that you will know God's voice, so you will know the difference between God speaking and when the Antichrist is speaking. Me personally, I ain't going to have to worry about that.
Amen.
As long as I'm right. And I pray every day, Jesus, let me be right.
You want us to be standing up.
And I'm going to be standing up and I'm going to beat every one of you out of the grave if that's how it happens, because I've got a head start. I don't have to sit up first. As long as Jenny adheres to my...
What about people in buildings? In buildings? What about people in buildings?
The dead in Christ will rise first.
Hey, I heard Jenny said she's going to put you 8 feet down. That way you won't get
8 feet
So-
upside down.
I'm looking for Lou for the back on track. He's over here cracking up laughing. So before we get into any, are there questions on those first 6 verses of how this is kind of presented? I want to go real quick. So Babylon here is represented as, well, I'm going to say as a whore. It's how it's represented. It's a biblical term. I can say it in this sense. Whose unfaithfulness affects many people and nations. That's what we're talking about right now.
Unfaithful to God.
Yes,
To God.
unfaithful to God.
So
And then,
that happened and affected nations?
yeah, pretty much nations. And we'll get as we get a little bit further when we start talking about the 7 hills and all that stuff. But yeah, it's basically corrupting nations is where we're at in the world. Where one nation may be corrupted now, one nation corrupted here and there. We're talking about a global scale. Well, what's left on a global scale. And then the scarlet-colored beast is a reference to the Antichrist and its allies whom Babylon sits. So that as well. Hopefully that stayed big enough so y'all can read that. But in verse 5, though the famous city of Babylon was on the Euphrates River, the name here seems to be a symbolic reference to Rome. And a lot of scholars go that route here. But before we get into verse 7 and on, I want you to look. If you go to the Greek, we were just talking about that when studying in the Greek. In the book of Revelation, in the Greek text, have you ever had an opportunity to look at that? It is broke into as many as 102 segments.
Wow.
That's how much the Greek text is broke down. Attempts to divide the material into larger units based on phrases in Greek such as, after this I saw, as indicating major breaks, and minor or subordinate visions, are not successful in this writer's view. However, there are 4 major visions. 4 major visions can be isolated based on context. So the Greek take it all the way to 102. 102 segments for the book of Revelation. I'm going to simplify it for you and give you 4. 4 easy ones. If you look at chapters 1, starting with verse 9 and going through chapter 3, verse 22, that is the glorified Christ and His church. That's one segment. If you look at verse 1, all the way through chapter 16, verse 21, that's Christ the Lamb and His judgments. You noticing the loop we're making here? Starting now with what we started tonight, chapter 17, going all the way through 21, verse 8. I love this, is the way you can phrase this. The conquering Christ.
Yes.
The conquering Christ. And 21, verse 9 through 22, verse 5 is something we all better be excited about. I'm just telling you right now. It's Christ and his bride and consummation in the New Jerusalem.
Amen.
Yeah.
If there is ever something we are striving for, it ought to be, we talked about that this morning, being the bride of Christ.
Right.
You want the first one again? You want all four of them again? All right. Yep. So starting with chapter 1, verse 9, and going through chapter 3, verse 22. That's the glorified Christ and his church. Okay? And then starting with chapter 4, all the way up through chapter 16, all of chapter 16, is Christ the Lamb and his judgments. See, I'm learning because our next study, I'm going to have some of this stuff printed out. I'm going to send it to you well in advance. We got notes. And then the conquering Christ is chapter 17 through chapter 21, verse 8. And then after that, 21, verse 9 through 22, 25 is Christ and his bride in consummation in the New Jerusalem. Did you get it?
Yes, sir.
All right. So that's kind of how you can really break this down. So we're at that point now where Revelation, I told you we had to get through the bad stuff to get through the good, to get to the good stuff, right? That's kind of where we're at now. We're at the conquering Christ. We're in that, if you were to do that segment. And so this is where we start getting out of all the devastation and the destruction, and we start getting to building through to our new home. Is where we're at now. So, but we have this vision, and John was given this vision, and then there came the interpretation of the vision. And if somebody would like to, I'm going to ask you to read a lot. Sorry. But I want to cover this entire vision, the interpretation, in one reading here, and we'll go back and forth on it. But if somebody would like to start reading in verse 8, and I want you to read all the way through verse 17.
Not going to read verse 7.
Did I miss 7? Yeah, let's start with 7. That's a good idea.
And the angel said unto me, Wherefore didst thou marvel? I will tell thee the mystery of the woman and of the beast that carrieth her, which hath the 7 horns and the 7 heads and the 10 horns. The beast that thou sawest is not, and shall ascend out of the bottomless pit and go into perdition. And they that dwell on the earth shall wonder, whose names were not written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, when they beheld the beast that was and is not and yet is. And here is the mind which has wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sitteth. And there are 7 kings, 5 are fallen, and 1 is, and the other is not yet come. And when he cometh, he must continue a short space. And the beast that was, and is not, even he, is the 8th, and is of the 7, and goeth into perdition. And the 10 horns which thou sawest are the 10 kings, which have received no kingdom as yet, but receive power as kings 1 hour with the beast. These have one mind, and shall give their power and strength unto the beast. These shall make war with the Lamb, and the Lamb shall overcome them. For he is Lord of lords and King of kings, and they that are with him are called the chosen and faithful. And he saith unto me, the waters which thou sawest, where the horse sitteth, are peoples, and multitudes, and nations, and tongues. And the 10 horns which thou sawest upon the beast, these shall hate the whore, and shall make her desolate and naked, and shall eat her flesh, and burn her with fire. For God hath put in their hearts to fulfill his will, and to agree and give their kingdom unto the beast, until the word of God shall be fulfilled.
All right. It's an interesting interpretation to that little bit of a vision there, ain't it? But I want you to notice back, and let's go all the way back to verse 6. And John here says, and I saw the woman drunken with the blood of the saints and with the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. And when I saw her, I wondered with great admiration. And the angel said unto me, wherefore didst thou marvel? So obviously John is looking at this and wondering what is taking place. Is exactly what it is. And the angel basically looks at him and says, look, I'm going to tell you. I'll tell you. And so John is amazed at the great personification and embodiment of evil in the woman and the beast. An interpreting angel begins to explain some of the features of the vision to John. Did anybody notice this explanation? This interpretation is almost a repeat of Daniel chapter 7.
Right.
Remember I told you Daniel would play an important part whenever we started getting into Revelation? So the beast is a world empire exactly as described in Daniel chapter 7. This world empire had a past existence but ceased to exist. However, it will come back as a manifestation of Satan, and the whole world will be amazed at the startling recovery of this empire. Hence why a lot of people believe this is going to be Rome.
I know because of the 7 mountains.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
The city on the 7 hills.
The city on the 7 hills. That's exactly it. Which is, I believe I had that up here somewhere. That description is probably on one of the next slides. So in verses 9 and 10, the beast is connected to the city of Rome, which sits upon 7 hills. But the angel says that the 7 hills are also the 7 kings. Hills or mountains are often symbols for kings or kingdoms. So whenever we look at 9 and 10, and it said there the 7 mountains, the 7 heads on the 7 mountains, remember whenever you read that, the hills or mountains, depending on what you're reading, are often symbols for kings or kingdoms. Kings and their kingdoms are often interchanged in prophetic literature, so the beast seems to be the final form of past world empires. 5 world empires were past at this point. Rome was in existence then, and a final form will arise. If this is correct, the 5 world empires are Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, Medo-Persia, and Greece.
Yes.
Rome in John's day, and we're, to give you kind of where we're at, we're AD 96, roughly, right now. Well, not right now, but where we're reading. Congratulations, we time traveled. So Rome in John's day, about AD 96, was the contemporary form of the beast's kingdom. A 7th kingdom will arise, which will transmute into the 8th. And the 8th will be Satan's masterwork with total domination of the world. I know it's hard for Christians to hear that, but it has to happen.
So like he's gonna have total control of the world at once?
Yes.
At one point.
A world that be gone by.
At one point.
Amen.
Yes.
I love that. As soon as that question arises, it's like not even a breath happens. Linda is just, yes.
I don't wanna be around for that.
Well,
May I say, to me, the world is coming to the point where Catholicism and Islam is going against the Jews and the Christians.
Right.
When that war begins, that's when we're going to be called out. The Antichrist is going to set up his throne in Jerusalem, and he's going to rule for 7 years.
Oh, it's
And
gonna be in Jerusalem.
chances are he's Catholic. We can't prove that from all the description. but it sure comes close.
Yeah. Yep.
Very
Um,
close.
So the Antichrist will set up his in Jerusalem. There was a lot of stuff when we were talking back in past chapters when the Antichrist came to fruition. It was all centered around Jerusalem. But now we're talking the devil setting up his. Satan is setting up his work. And so you're more likely to be in Rome at this point.
You better watch what you read, because sometimes Israel is called Babylon too.
Mhm.
It is.
Yes.
That's exactly it.
That's why you, like you say, you need to study it, not just skim it. You gotta study it,
Right.
find out.
I mean, I guarantee we could do this chapter, come back next week and start it completely over, and we'll find something new in it.
Right.
That's the way this is going to go. But then you also have here in verse 12, the horns are also interpreted by the angel. They are the 10 kings and their kingdoms which are not yet in existence.
Right.
But they will arise with the same satanic empowerment as the beast. These 10 kingdoms will be united in purpose with the beast to make war against Jesus Christ, who is the Lamb. The angel assured John that the Lamb has complete sovereign power, and he will be victorious, and all his followers will share in victory. Can I explain something here? I love how the angel gave John reassurance. Because imagine what John is seeing right now. He is basically seeing something that every Christian fears if it would happen, and that is Satan coming to full power and control. So it doesn't say this in here, but I kind of have to wonder if for a moment John didn't go, uh-oh, for a moment. That would cause the angel to reassure him complete victory. So that's one thing we have to understand, is as bad as it's going to get, as bad as the stuff that we have read here, that is the stuff that has gone on, as bad as it's going to go, as bad as what we're living in right now, we're going to win. Jesus will win.
We have that hope, yes.
We have that. And it's not just a hope. We have that promise.
Yes.
Yes.
We have that promise. He will win. And you go, well, where do you get the promise from? We'll get there. It's coming. But we have a promise. We are on the winning side of this war.
Praise the Lord.
Back up, rewind. You have to be saved to be on the winning side.
Praise
right.
Him. Yes. Thank you.
So the angel assured John that the Lamb has complete sovereign power. He will be victorious, and all of his followers will share in that victory. The interpretation is very similar to Daniel's night vision of the Son of Man. If you remember back, that was in chapter 7, verses 13 and 14 for Daniel. Daniel also has an angel who interprets for him. You seeing similarities here?
Yes.
We didn't read verse 18. What does that mean, verse 18?
We haven't read it because I don't want to read it yet.
Okay. I was wondering.
Gee, where do you get that from?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I was thinking that exactly.
Where do you get that from? So one thing about angels here. Angels in the Bible are seen in many roles. The angels of God carry out His will and judgments in the protection of His people, in the worship of God, and in revelation. The interpreting angel is often found in the Bible where he makes clear or makes known God's visions. The book of Hebrews compares and contrasts Jesus with the angels. So there are some similarities and there are some major differences.
Right.
And if you want to go and look at that, it's Hebrews chapter 1, verses 1 through 14 is where you'll find that. See, we've seen angels used for a lot of different things. And I like that how this kind of broke out. Even the angels of God carry out His will. And then the list that I listed off there, the judgments, the protection of His people, in the worship of God. And even in revealing things, revelation.
Even Satan knows this.
That's exactly it.
He knows it, and
he knows he's not gonna win though, right?
Satan knows his future.
Yeah,
I'm a firm believer he
But
knows his
he's still trying
future.
to get people to follow him,
yeah. He,
because he don't want those people to go to
To-
heaven.
The way I always thought of that, and the way I've always put it, he don't want people that he don't want. Wow. He doesn't want people to have what he lost out on.
that's right.
Is exactly the best way that I can think to put
Jealous
it.
of us?
Yes,
Yes.
yeah.
You can put it that way. Because those that are saved, those that are blood-bought, born again, living the way they ought to be living, that are on their way to heaven,
If he gets you.
can have something Satan can never have.
Right.
Now,
If he has you, he's thinking gave God a black eye.
that's exactly it.
That's it. That's what I think that Satan's almost like, I remember my dad telling me, I remember, and Dennis used something about this in a Sunday school about, you get in a fight, you don't have to be the winner, just make sure that the person knows you're in a fight. And I think that that's part of what Satan's doing too. He knows he loses in the end, but he also knows that God is long suffering over every one of us. And everyone he takes away is that jab. So, we look at this and we think to ourselves, well, why doesn't Satan just, he knows exactly what's going to happen to him. Why don't he just lay down and take it? He's not going to. He's going to, as much damage as he can cause before that day comes is what he's going to do.
So whenever it comes to the 10 kingdoms, it is impossible to predict where and when these 10 kingdoms will come on the scene of world history. It's impossible to predict. However, you have those people that try to do it. But it is impossible to predict. Most interpreters who venture a guess favor the nations and a revived Rome that is European. But they could come from anywhere in the Mediterranean area or even the Middle East. This is why chapters 17 and 18 are so highly split on. Because we as people naturally want every answer to every question. This is one thing you cannot predict. This is like trying to predict when Jesus is going to come back. You just can't do it. You just cannot do it. So starting in verse 15 is where we will pick up next week.
To be continued.
You were like ready because you want that 18, don't you? Well, I haven't even got through 15, 16, 17 yet. You want me to give you a spoiler?
Okay.
It has
Don't
to
say
do.
we win, because that's not
It has to do with the satanic civil war,
Yes.
where the 10 kingdoms arise and they take out the harlot.
okay.
It's a Satan. Basically, Satan will start fighting amongst himself.
Yes.
Is basically what verse 18 is talking about there.
Okay.
Whenever we get there and the rest of us read it, we'll go in depth into that. But that's basically what that is. So we will be picking up next week verses starting in verse 15, and then we will carry from there over into 18. This all runs together. It is broken up into different chapters, but when we're done with verse 18, we will have covered what is known as the religious Babylon. Once you get into chapter 18, you get into what is known as the commercial Babylon. So we'll go through all that, and then it gets even better. We got to get some bad stuff out of the way to get to the good. And in verse 19, or in chapter 19, the good is coming. The good is coming.
I have all of them up to the end.
Of these?
Yes.
Oh, I'm going to use this to see also what he has to say on these last few verses too. Because I was looking at some of the stuff as we were reading, and I'm like, oh, this stuff's pretty good, which is stuff I already had, but he had a different twist on it.
Yeah.
But it'll be good. So as we do always every week, are there any questions before we close out onto where we're at, other than I want more information on verse 18?
That's not a question, that's a demand.
I really did do a good cliffhanger right there, didn't I?
You have on purpose?
No, that was complete accident. Trust me, I'm not smart enough to think of that.
Amen.
When we were a kid, we'd go to the movies, you know, the young guys, the kids, and they'd paint this Batman up to where he's falling off a building, and then
Yeah.
that's the end of it.
Yep.
They
What?
have movies then?
They call them picture shows.
It doesn't really have anything to do with this.
Mhm.
Cherubim and seraphim, they're angels, right?
Say it one more time.
I was
The
Googling,
cherubim,
Cherubim,
seraphims.
I tried to Google to find out what they are, and I wasn't getting anywhere, I know it's spelled right.
If they are types of angels, I'm trying to remember exactly how it is.
I didn't hear what she said.
Cherubims and seraphims.
Yeah,
They are types of angels, I'm pretty
they
sure.
are, they're the power angels,
Yeah,
they're the ones that stand at the throne too.
right.
There's one that was put in the Garden of Eden, so nothing can pass that.
Yeah. They're the ones for protection, right? Am I thinking that
Yeah,
right?
they're too powerful for anything to pass through them. That's who guards God.
You have them, and then I think, other than God and Jesus, above them, I think are the archangels. Archangels.
Yeah.
I'll say it right.
Satan was number one. I mean,
The
Was.
archangels.
was number one.
So he got kicked out.
God gave him, he gave him earth
Yeah.
as a,
He had, when you think about it, he had everything.
everything.
But,
Everything except.
yeah, everything except what he wanted.
Except the final throne.
But think about this.
Greed.
Think about man today. Man thinks he has everything he wants. When man can have a whole lot more.
Oh,
Yes.
God.
This reminds me of a play we went to, a program, a live performance of this happening. And they were actually looking like they're cutting people's heads off and everything. And the angels was one of the big deals towards the end, the angels coming down, the seraphims and cherubims.
Yeah.
It was something to see, but I'll
Yeah.
never forget it when I hear that.
Did you ever think about the angel that takes hold of Satan, bounds him? Big angel,
Mhm.
power.
Mm-hmm. We'll get into that. I'll even let you.
There is jumping ahead
Yeah,
again.
but are you gonna finish it, or are you gonna?
Or cliffhanger it?
Yeah.
Depends on how I feel that. Depends on if you're asking questions about verses ahead, Rachel.
I feel like you're gonna study on next week.
Did you ever think
but you're
about-
gonna put it on a cliffhanger and you're gonna, yeah.
Now we'll get it next
You're
week.
gonna know.
Did you ever think about Christ puts down the world? And they come back in 1,000 years and want to do the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't the first time was enough.
Right. Yep.
Of course, he has to get rid of all these sin.
Yes. That's it. Sin has to be wiped out.
Right.
Got all these people that like to jump ahead.
Mm-hmm.
You?
Yep.
You're too close to the good stuff.
That's what it is. We're getting
Yeah,
into the
yeah,
good stuff.
yeah.
Because especially when we start talking about the 12 foundations. It took everything I had to not jump all over a Sunday school lesson that Dennis was teaching when he started talking about that. So then I go, I can-
Sometimes I'll hear you make noise and I'm like, oh my god. You make a noise and I'm like, oh god.
What's going on in his head? Be
All
sitting
right.
beside your grandpa and he's trying to fight jumping up out of his chair.
All right, so we'll come to you now for prayer requests like we
Yes.
do every week.
For our family,
Yes.
I have my reasons for saying that. Can't say it. I'm not going to say it until the Lord tells me to.
Janie, my sister,
Yeah.
she needs prayer too.
All our lost loved ones.
Yeah. Jeremy.
Jeremy.
Was your hand up or were you stretching?
No, I was just being me.
Oh, okay. now I know how Dennis
I
feels.
go,
Anybody else tonight?
Remember me and Boston?
Amen.
Oh, I remember you guys.
Trying to forget, huh?
No.
We don't forget you.
No.
You're in our prayer.
More people come to Bible studies.
I like
Donald.
Yeah, install.
I like Josh's prayer request, more people to come to Bible
Yeah,
study.
amen.
Amen.
Not just so I have more people to talk to, but
Besides
But-
ones in your head.
there's a lot there. But the whole, when the doors are open.
Yes,
Amen.
yes.
Yes.
Anybody else?
It's a serious thing, what you're doing.
Pray for me. I'm seeking guidance on where I'm going to end up next for study-wise. I jokingly looked at Ed and went, "We're almost done with this." He goes, "With this book." I wanted to make sure it's true.
You're gonna have to study up on the angels, that's a good one to get in there.
I've been looking a lot into the life and teachings of Jesus,
Yeah.
looking at every single parable. I've been looking at possibly that, but I don't have a clear direction yet. So until I have a clear direction, I have no idea what we're doing after Revelation.
It'll come to you.
Anybody else? Remember our outreach?
Yes.
Zach presented the pastor with